Medieval families lived in one room, not by choice, but by necessity, shaped by survival, scarcity, and control. Space was limited, resources were scarce, and privacy was considered a luxury rather than a need. The household was designed around function, not comfort. One room had to serve as shelter, workplace, storage, and sleeping area, because separating life into zones required materials, labor, and security most people could not afford. Daily life revolved around constant proximity. Cooking, working, resting, and sleeping happened within the same confined space. Heat from fire was essential for survival, especially during cold seasons, and keeping everyone close reduced fuel consumption. Walls were thin, insulation poor, and expanding living space increased vulnerability to cold, theft, and collapse. One room was easier to heat, guard, and maintain. Economic pressure reinforced this structure. Most families lived at the edge of subsistence. Housing reflected income, and income rarely allowed expansion. Building materials were expensive, repairs frequent, and ownership insecure. Renting additional space was unrealistic. The home was not an investment in comfort, but a temporary defense against exposure, hunger, and danger. Space was minimized to reduce risk and cost. Work and family life were inseparable. Craft, repair, food preparation, and child supervision occurred simultaneously. Children learned by watching and assisting, not through separation or instruction. The single room forced constant observation, ensuring discipline and productivity. There was no physical boundary between labor and rest, reinforcing endurance as a daily condition rather than a temporary effort. Psychologically, constant closeness shaped behavior. Privacy was rare, emotions were regulated, and personal boundaries were weak. Silence, restraint, and emotional control were necessary to avoid conflict. People adapted by suppressing individual needs in favor of collective stability. The household functioned as a unit, not as individuals sharing space. Survival depended on cooperation and tolerance. Authority within the family was reinforced by proximity. Hierarchies were visible at all times. Children, elders, and dependents were constantly supervised. Discipline was immediate, correction unavoidable. The one-room home became a space of continuous social regulation, where behavior was shaped through observation rather than instruction. Health and hygiene were compromised by this arrangement, but alternatives were limited. Smoke, waste, illness, and parasites circulated easily. Yet separation increased exposure to cold and danger. Families accepted these conditions because the risks of expansion were greater than the discomfort of crowding. Survival prioritized containment over cleanliness. The single-room household reflected a broader social logic. Society itself offered little separation between work, authority, and survival. Just as villages were compact and hierarchical, homes mirrored the same structure. Life was compressed, monitored, and disciplined. Space was not meant to liberate, but to control risk. Living in one room trained people to endure closeness, suppress individuality, and accept limitation as normal. It shaped habits, expectations, and emotional discipline from childhood onward. The household was not a private refuge, but a survival mechanism, where every action was visible and every weakness exposed. This constant compression of life into a single space reshaped how medieval people thought, felt, and related to one another. With no physical separation, the family existed in a state of permanent exposure. Every sound, movement, and reaction was noticed. Conflict could not be avoided by distance, only managed through restraint. Silence became a survival skill, and emotional control was learned early because there was nowhere to retreat, and no moment truly alone. The absence of privacy altered relationships. Intimacy and authority existed side by side, often inseparable. Children witnessed labor, exhaustion, illness, aging, and death directly. Nothing was hidden, and nothing was delayed. This constant visibility accelerated maturity and reduced emotional distance between generations. Care and discipline were immediate, while individuality was limited by the demands of collective survival. Sleep itself was shaped by this environment. Families rested together, often in shifts, adjusting to noise, heat, and movement. Rest was shallow and easily interrupted. Fatigue accumulated over time, dulling sensitivity and reinforcing endurance as a necessary trait. The body adapted to discomfort because comfort was neither expected nor prioritized. Survival demanded tolerance rather than relief. Health risks were constant. Smoke from the fire filled the room, animals shared the space, and waste was difficult to isolate. Illness spread quickly, and recovery was uncertain. Yet separation was not a solution. Additional rooms required more fuel, more maintenance, and greater exposure to cold and intrusion. Crowding was dangerous, but dispersion was worse. Families accepted risk because it was predictable, while alternatives were not. Social control extended beyond the household. The one-room home mirrored the structure of medieval society itself. Villages were compact, oversight constant, and deviation visible. Living without walls between functions trained people to accept surveillance as normal. Authority was not distant or abstract. It was present in the same space every day. This normalized obedience and reduced the expectation of personal autonomy. Emotionally, people learned to endure rather than express. Grief, fear, and frustration were contained, not explored. Open displays of emotion risked destabilizing the fragile balance of shared space. Over time, restraint became internalized. People measured their reactions, lowered their expectations, and adapted to limitation as a permanent condition. The environment shaped temperament as much as culture or belief. The single-room household also limited imagination of alternatives. When life, labor, rest, and family all existed in one place, separation itself seemed unnecessary or unrealistic. The idea of private space never fully formed for most people. Survival required adaptation to what existed, not longing for what could not be sustained. This narrowed ambition and reinforced acceptance of hierarchy and constraint. Ultimately, medieval families lived in one room because their world allowed little margin for separation. Scarcity, danger, and control compressed life into shared space. That space disciplined bodies, regulated emotions, and shaped social behavior. It trained people to endure closeness, accept exposure, and function under constant observation. The one-room home was not merely a housing solution. It was a system that produced obedience, resilience, and restraint, shaping medieval life from childhood to death without offering escape or privacy.